You're lying in the dark as Arctic wind claws at your shelter, sleet driving sideways, soaking everything you own, and you can feel the cold seeping upward from the ground. You pull your blanket tighter and wonder how anyone survived nights like this without modern tarps, membranes, or synthetic gear. So here's the challenge you're facing. How did WWII soldiers stay dry in storms that froze skin in minutes, using nothing more than a simple wool blanket? And why did that method sometimes outperform equipment you trust today? This isn't a story about comfort. It's about survival under conditions where wet meant dead. Imagine being cut off from resupply, no shelter standing, snow turning to rain, rain turning to ice. Soldiers didn't have the option to quit. They had to adapt fast or not wake up. Somewhere in that pressure, a counterintuitive trick emerged. Not a gadget, not a miracle fabric. A way of using a blanket that turned water from an enemy into something manageable. It looks unimpressive at first glance, almost laughably old-fashioned. But once you understand what they were doing, you start to see why it worked, why it spread quietly through units, and why it was slowly forgotten once war ended, and technology promised easier answers. To grasp why this mattered, you have to feel what Arctic warfare was really like. Soldiers fought in places where storms arrived without warning and temperatures flipped above and below freezing in hours. Snow melted into rain, rain soaked clothing, and then everything froze solid. Canvas shelters leaked. Early rubberized tarps cracked in extreme cold. Staying dry wasn't about comfort, it was about keeping body heat alive. Wool blankets were standard issue, heavy, scratchy, and often dismissed as primitive. Yet they were everywhere. You carried one whether you liked it or not. Soldiers noticed something crucial through experience. Wool behaved differently when wet. It didn't collapse. It didn't steal heat instantly. Even soaked, it insulated. Through trial, error, and desperation, troops began using blankets not just for warmth, but as weather control. They wrapped, folded, and layered them in specific ways. They slept under them, not on them. They combined body heat, breath, and structure. This wasn't taught formally. It spread by watching who survived storms better. The lived reality forced soldiers to learn fast, share quietly, and trust results over theory. Imagine this step by step. Instead of stretching a blanket flat like a tarp, soldiers angled it steeply, creating runoff rather than tension. Here's the clever part. Wool fibers naturally repel water at first, thanks to lanolin. Rain beads, then slowly penetrates. By pitching the blanket so water ran off before soaking through, they bought time. Next, they layered intelligently. One blanket overhead, another beneath, separating ground moisture from body heat. Snow was piled around the edges, not as a threat, but as insulation. This is where it changes. As your body warmed the air inside, moisture from breath condensed on the cold outer layer instead of soaking inward. The blanket became a breathable barrier, not a seal. Wet on the outside, dry inside. If water did soak through, wool still trapped heat by maintaining air pockets. Soldiers learned to shake, rotate and dry blankets using wind and movement instead of fire. Nothing was static. The system depended on angle, airflow, and timing. It wasn't about blocking water completely. It was about managing where it went and how fast it moved. So why did this work when early tarps often failed? Because it accepted reality instead of denying it. In Arctic storms, you can't stop moisture. You can only control its behavior. Wool breathes. It allows vapor to escape while slowing liquid water. That balance prevented internal condensation, one of the biggest killers in cold environments. Synthetic barriers trapped moisture inside, soaking clothing from sweat even when rain stayed out. The blanket hack worked because it separated functions. Outer layers shed and absorbed water. Inner layers preserved warmth. Snow added insulation instead of pressure. Even when everything was damp, heat stayed where it mattered. The unexpected logic is that dry enough beats sealed tight. Soldiers didn't aim for perfection. They aimed for survivable conditions hour by hour. The blanket adapted as conditions changed, something rigid materials couldn't do. It bent, breathed, froze, thawed, and kept working. That flexibility is why experienced troops trusted it. It wasn't elegant, but it was honest. And in storms where honesty mattered more than innovation, that made all the difference. So why did this knowledge fade? Not because it stopped working, but because war ended and materials improved on paper. Post-war gear promised waterproof perfection. Plastics, coatings and laminates replaced wool. Training manuals simplified shelter building. Soldiers were issued specialized tarps and ponchos, and blanket skills were no longer taught. The problem is that modern materials depend on conditions being stable. When they fail completely. The blanket method required judgment, experience, and adjustment. It didn't scale easily. It couldn't be marketed as foolproof. Over time, it was labelled outdated, heavy, inefficient. Wool itself became expensive and unfashionable. Yet the environments didn't change. Storms still behave the same. Moisture still moves the same way. The logic never broke. It was simply overshadowed by convenience and confidence in technology. When modern gear works, it's excellent. When it doesn't, people suddenly rediscover old methods and wonder why they were ever abandoned. This is why the WWII blanket hack still matters to you today. In emergencies, power failures, expeditions or disasters, gear breaks, coatings peel and supplies run out. Understanding systems beats owning equipment. The principles soldiers use still apply. Manage moisture, preserve heat, work with airflow, accept imperfection. Wool blankets, poncho liners and layered fabrics are making quiet comebacks among people who plan for failure, not comfort. This isn't about rejecting modern gear. It's about having knowledge underneath it. When you know why something works, you're not helpless when it doesn't. WWII soldiers survived Arctic storms, not because they had better materials, but because they understood what cold and water actually do. That understanding is still available to you. If this story changed how you think about survival, materials, or forgotten fieldcraft, keep learning and keep sharing. Old knowledge doesn't expire. It waits for the moment you need it again.